The following interview aired on the Humanist Network News, an audio production of the Institute for Humanist Studies. Learn more at humaniststudies.org.
So, in honor of Charles Darwin and my own simian roots, I have taken upon myself to grow a beard for Darwin Day. Jess, how do you think my Darwin Day beard is coming along?
Probably about the same as reading The Origin of Species, huh? How's that going for you?
Okay, this is true. I have not actually read The Origin of Species, but I know someone who has, Professor Massimo Piglucci, who teaches evolutionary biology at SUNY Stony Brook on Long Island, and I called him to help me cram before Darwin Day. Massimo is the author of several books, including Making Sense of Evolution, Denying Evolution, and Tales of the Rational. His website and blog can be found at rationallyspeaking.org.
He's also the author of Evolution, Creationism, and the Nature of Science, which is an online course offered through the Institute for Humanist Studies online humanist school, the Continuum of Humanist Education, which is at humanisteducation.com. Professor Piglucci was more than happy to provide us, or should I say Duncan, with the Cliff Notes version of The Origin of Species, which was originally published in 1859 when Darwin was 50.
Well, Jess, I'm not alone. According to the professor, most professional biologists haven't even read The Origin of Species either. They usually read some secondary text that mentions Darwin, and they move on to the current literature of the day.
I see. Well, at any rate, we spoke with Massimo Piglucci by phone on Monday.
The bottom line of The Origin of Species is this. Darwin called it a long argument, one long argument. In fact, it is essentially a book of natural history, largely based on his own observations, which, however, builds this long argument that attempts to establish two main points. One, that all living organisms on Earth are related by common descent. That is, we all go back to either one or a few common ancestors at the origin of life, after the origin of life. And two, that the main driving force for the variability, for the variety of life on Earth, and especially for the fact that life on Earth seems to be so well adapted to its environment, it's a process called natural selection, which Darwin came up with or discovered, depending on how you want to put it, as an analogy, in part as a direct analogy with artificial selection and breeding. In fact, there are chapters on pigeon breedings, for example, in The Origin of Species. So the basic two concepts are common descent and natural selection.
So there are two main points we need to remember about The Origin of Species: common descent and natural selection. Got it. Now, what about this term survival of the fittest?
Darwin did not use, at least originally, did not use that phrase, the survival of the fittest. That was Herbert Spencer, who was a controversial popularizer of Darwin's ideas, and then eventually came up with the whole concept of social Darwinism, which Darwin repudiated and essentially no serious evolutionary biologist today subscribes to. That social Darwinism being the idea that we should apply the principle of natural selection to human societies and essentially have the strongest or survive even within modern society. So Spencer came up with that idea. Now, the idea does play, of course, in the concept of natural selection. The idea of natural selection essentially says that there is variation among organisms in their ability to be adapted to their environment. So different individuals have different characteristics. If these characteristics are, one, heritable, so they can be transmitted from one generation to another, and two, make a difference in the fitness, meaning in the survival and reproduction of the individual, then natural selection will favor those individuals that have those characteristics. And essentially, in fact, this is a definition of natural selection. Natural selection is whatever process favors the transmission across generations of characteristics that enhance the survival and or reproduction of individuals.
So we know that life evolves over time, but where did the first living creatures come from? Did Darwin discover where life itself comes from?
Contrary to what most creationists seem to think still today, the question of the origin of life is in fact outside of the proper scope of Darwinian theory, for the simple reason that the ideas of Darwin and the current ideas of evolutionary biology really deal with what happens to population of organisms and how they evolve over time. But in order for that to make sense, you have to have already life existing. So the question of the origin of life, of course, it's important. It's an interesting scientific question, but it's outside of the proper scope of biological evolutionary theory. It really belongs more to, say, biochemistry or biophysics.
But that still leaves the God question. Massimo says that Darwin had no intention of disproving the existence of God, but he was very aware of the serious metaphysical implications that his ideas had. Darwin's ideas focused on explaining the diversity and history of life on Earth, but people have been debating the relationship between Darwin's theory of evolution and God ever since.
My personal take on that is that, in fact, if one fully embraces the Darwinian view of the world, there are some kinds of religious doctrines and beliefs that become to make precisely no sense. For example, if you believe that the Earth was created 6,000 years or 8,000 years ago, that clearly has been shown by science, beginning with evolutionary biology and continuing with geology, to be false. And so if your belief in God depends on that specific kind of statement about the natural world, then you're in serious metaphysical trouble. But on the other hand, if your metaphysics is more generic and one believes only in a sort of a general creating principle of the origin of the universe, then Darwin and evolutionary biology have pretty much nothing to say about that.
There have been two major theoretical improvements after Darwin. The first was the beginning of genetics and inheritance as an independent science.
Later, in the 1930s and 40s, there was an attempt by several prominent biologists to come up with a unified theory of evolutionary biology that included natural selection, genetics, and natural history. The unified theory is called modern synthesis and is currently the accepted paradigm. Modern synthesis is a great expansion on Darwin's theory, but the two basic pillars of evolutionary biology are still natural selection and common descent.
For a variety of reasons, I think Charles Darwin is, by most historians of science and philosophers of science accounts, one of the most important figures, intellectuals in the history of humanity. Period. So the same reason we have the same reason to celebrate Darwin that we would have to celebrate, say, Einstein, which we just did last year. There was a big celebration of the famous three major papers that Einstein published in 1905. The same reason that we celebrate, big thinkers such as Newton, or even outside of science, people like Socrates. I don't know. So that's one reason. The other reason, which is, of course, why Darwin Day started out independently in several locations in the United States in the mid-90s, is because there is a continuous threat to evolutionary biology in particular, but to science in general, that has been posed by fundamentalist Christians, although not only Christians, certainly in this country, of course, mostly fundamentalist Christians, who reject entirely a Darwinian worldview because they do feel that it trends their metaphysical beliefs. And in that sense, a Darwin Day is really not much a celebration of Darwin himself as a way to do some outreach and to explain to the general public not only the principles of evolutionary biology and the relationship between science and religion and all that, but more in general, how science works as a process, why science is distinct from metaphysics, for example, or theology, and what scientists really do and really say when they do their work, as opposed to what the local preacher might tell you that they do or say.
Massimo Piglucci will be celebrating Darwin Day this year by lecturing in Iowa, Illinois, and at SUNY Stony Brook on Long Island about science and evolution. Be sure to check out his website at rationallyspeaking.org. And don't forget to take his online course on science and humanism at humanisteducation.com.
Darwin, grandson of a poet, also of a potter, was brought up by his sister when his mother was dead. At 16, he knew about the classics. He thought he'd be a doctor. He studied for a while in Edinburgh. The surgeons used no anesthesia. He wondered about the clergy, and off he went to Cambridge, where he earned a degree. But insects intrigued him more than preaching, and so he joined the Beagle.
That song we were playing is Charles Robert Darwin by the band Artichoke. Thanks to Allison Bates, senior campus organizer of the Secular Student Alliance, for alerting us to that song.
Humanist Network News is an audio production of the Institute for Humanist Studies, a nonprofit think tank that promotes the philosophy of humanism. Learn more at humaniststudies.org.